Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, the podcast for GPs, doctors and other professionals in high-stress jobs. Working in today's pressured environment, you may feel like a frog in boiling water. Things have heated up so slowly that you might not have noticed the extra long days becoming the norm. You've got used to feeling constantly busy and often one crisis away from not coping. Let's face it, frogs only have two options: to stay in the pan, be boiled alive, or to hop out and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. You can do more than just hop out or burn out. There are simple changes that you can make which will make a huge difference to your stress levels and help you enjoy life again. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Morris, GP turned executive coach, speaker, specialist in workplace resilience and creator of the Shapes Toolkit training programme. In the podcast, I'll be chatting with friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this stuff, so that together we can take back control and thrive. If you want more resources, including CPD reflection forms for the podcast, then make sure you've signed up to the You Are Not a Frog Collective, and please share these podcasts with anyone who needs them. On with the episode. So it's really great to have with me on the podcast today, Gita Trevorrow-Seymour. Now, Gita's an executive coach and leadership development expert, and she's a communication skills expert as well. And you tell me, Gita, you're a self-confessed neuroscience nerd. Is that right?
Oh my God, completely obsessed with that. 3 pounds of flesh between our ears, Rachel, completely obsessed. I can't imagine anybody that wouldn't be, honestly. Like, why wouldn't you want to know how that whole thing works inside there? I love it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, when you start to delve down into actually why are we thinking and feeling how we do, and often there's a completely rational explanation for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been obsessed with human behavior since I was 6. I started life, just looking at people wanting to know what was going on inside their heads. I didn't even know there was something called neuroscience until a couple of years ago to actually understand it, right, and what's going on in there. But humans are infinitely fascinating.
Yeah. And I guess the good thing about being able to understand it and apply it is then you know what you can change. And you can actually how we can act differently and how the neuroscience will back that up. And it's a little bit more evidence-based than perhaps it used to be.
Yeah, and I think it makes a difference in the work that I do with people. Sometimes, particularly, it's human to human, right? There's so much room for error around things, and we take things so incredibly personally. So what I found is, once people understand what's actually happening, and I don't necessarily go into the science of it with everybody, but for those that are particularly analytical, which is a lot of my clients in kind of the finance industry, it really helps to take the personal out of things. So where once upon a time you might be like, oh God, I can't believe that person is so rude or so aggressive, or, they're just so dismissive, or it becomes very personal, human on human. And when you can take a step back and understand that actually it's a series of pathways that you've set up in your brain that are being triggered, and you have full control over that. It's so liberating. It becomes less about he said this and she did that and he doesn't like me and that person on my team is rubbish, because just getting that framework to then make decisions around is so powerful. For me too, with my team, by the way, because I'm still figuring it all out.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the really great things about being a coach is no matter how much I can help other people, I feel like I'm gaining even more myself from every conversation and everything I read, and every time I run a training course, I'm like, oh yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I did psychology at university, and even then, you find the people that are drawn to that are the ones that are, really wanting to have a level of self-discovery first, right? And then, as you say, you come out of a coaching session, like, wow, that was powerful. But then actually you start to reflect, as part of it, you start to reflect on what you learned. And the teacher becomes a student in that very cliched way.
Yeah, that's great. And we're recording this podcast in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. So we're all in lockdown. We have families around the house. I've got a big sign on my door saying, podcast recording, do not come in. Although, I can imagine any minute now I will get a little intruder.
I had that last week, actually. I did a free masterclass on how to stop the overwhelm, right? And see the possibilities. And I specifically said I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. And my husband actually was downstairs. He's like, no one will come up. I'm on patrol. My mum lives with her. She's like, don't worry. It's all lockdown in lockdown. And then it was probably about 7 minutes before the end of the hour, and I saw the telltale sign of the door going like this. And I'm like, well, heads up, everybody. I think there were like 50 people live. I'm like, just heads up, but the door is opening and I don't know which child is going to come in.
Yeah.
Clearly a very, very important update from my 5-year-old on his blood collection. That had to be, but it's the new reality, and that's it. It can either cause you stress, or you can view it as part of the reality and deal with it differently.
Yeah. Well, I got interrupted in the middle of a webinar the other day by my cat, who'd managed to somehow open the door and just walked into the middle of my office and stood and just went meow very loudly and then walked out again. So, hey, the cat's...
Let you know I'm here.
The cat's at it as well. Anyway, so on to the podcast today. So just a bit of a context, we're filming this from lockdown. We, know the stress and the strain it's having on everybody. And Gita and I were talking recently about the way it's sort of affecting teams and what's happening, particularly from what I'm seeing amongst doctors working in hospital. And I had a friend who happened to comment to me that one of the members of her team was being quite difficult, but wholly in character, actually. She said, actually we could have predicted the way that this person was going to respond during this crisis. They've always almost under stress become more them, become almost sort of retreated into more, we see each other's bad points, each other's difficulties. And I guess a lot of the podcasts that I've been doing, we've been talking about making allowances just for ourselves, but also making allowances for other people, because when we are under a lot of stress, we don't behave particularly well, do we? And we were chatting about actually the different stress reactions that we do have. So what sort of stress, what's the spectrum of stress reactions that people can show in terms of their behavior?
Yeah, I think it's really useful to understand what the norm looks like, so that you can then recognize what stress looks like. So when I'm doing leadership work, for example, and I still say it for anyone anyway, is you've got to put the oxygen mask on first, right? Let me take a breath in. Let me figure out who I am and where I'm coming from and what happens to me under stress. And then let me turn the spotlight out. Let me put the oxygen mask on someone else. And that requires you to understand, firstly, what their base point is. Actually, where are they coming from in a neutral position? And then how do I recognize when they're under stress? So it's useful. And there's a lot of different psychometric profiling tools out there. I use a very detailed one called HBDI. And it gives you your profile as well as your profile under stress. But what I thought might be really useful for your listeners today is to talk about another profile that I use, which is social styles. Firstly, because if they're interested, I can send them a free downloadable and they can actually see what their style is versus working with me on the paid version of HBDI. But also because it becomes this way of assessing other people will become very clear to them, so that you can start to even straight away today go, oh, I think I'm here and I think that person's there, and start to apply it. So if that's useful, I'll just give a little 5-minute what that framework is, and then talk a little bit about what happens to those different stresses, different people under stress. Is that useful? That'd
be great. I think the social styles one is just really simple, isn't it? It's really easy to get
very simple,
and you can immediately go, oh, yeah, that's me, or that's them.
Exactly. You can start to spot people in the wild, right? It's like, oh, I think that's what's happening for Rachel. I think she's on that side of the line.
So tell us about it.
It's very simple as a 4-box quadrant as per usual, and there's 4 different styles. The axes are about assertiveness and, interestingly, to use your word, responsiveness. The thing that I want people to understand is that it's very easy to start spotting which side of the line people are on. So, for example, people that are, and I'm trying to see which way this will go on the video, but people that are right of the line are more likely to talk in a lot of statements. They're going to tell you up front what they think, whether they're under stress or not. People that are left of the line are going to really need some time to process things. And
this is the assertiveness line.
Exactly.
So the x-axis is the assertiveness axis. Right. Okay. Got you.
Yes. So
people on the right
that axis
are more assertive.
Going to tell you. Yeah. And I get, I mean, assertive is a challenging word sometimes, I think, for people. But yeah, they're going to assert their opinion more when they're communicating. People that are left of the line are going to ask more questions, appear less assertive, because they need time to process it. So on a team meeting, for example, you're on a Zoom and you say, hey, Rachel, I'd love your opinion on that. And Rachel say, yeah, nothing to add right now. And you're like, oh, okay, thanks a lot for that, Rachel. But actually you needed time and you've got a magnificent idea there that's going to come, but it's going to come later. Right. And we're going to talk in a minute about the stress and what that adds to that situation, for example, in a team meeting. And then the y-axis is about responsiveness, and what the language of social styles is that at the top is control and at the bottom is emote. Now, I find that gets a little challenging because people think of people above the line, right? So actually it's that way, right of the line and left of the line for tell and ask. They think of people that are above the line as like robotic and controlled and emotionless, and people below the line, clearly they're like hysterical and they work in HR. Obviously, it's more complex than that. So I think the way to, if you're thinking about yourself first, which is what I encourage your listeners to do, is self-assess as we're talking, is, okay, am I right of the line? Do I talk in statements a lot? Am I happy to offer my opinion quickly? Am I left of the line? Do I ask a lot of questions? Do I need time to process? And then the other axis is, am I above the line in terms of task? When push comes to shove, am I focused on what needs to be done? And then or am I below the line? And in fact, when push comes to shove, I'm focused more on relationship. So I'm focused more on who's involved. So just pause there. Any sort of clarification on that? I know you're familiar with this type of work as well, but.
So yeah, that's interesting. So the assert one, it's not about are you assertive or not, because you might not assert immediately, but you can be very assertive. It's about how quickly you'll assert your opinion as opposed to sort of more listening and asking questions. And then, so that's, yeah, x-axis. And then the y-axis is all about, the top of the y is about more controlled in your response and more thinking through. I guess you might, if you're applying that to Myers-Briggs, it might be more of a thinker than Myers-Briggs, and down at the bottom it's more about people who maybe their feelings are more emote and stuff like that.
Exactly.
I can see where I am already.
Can you? Which let me tell you what the quadrants are, and then I want to hear which box do you think you're in, and then I'll tell you what the quadrants are.
So I'm in the bottom right box. Definitely.
Bottom right.
I'm quite quick to give my opinion on things.
Yep.
I'm definitely quite relationship focused feelings, and I think if you ask my other half, I do tend to emote quite quickly and a lot.
Quite quickly.
Yeah.
So that's really good self-awareness first. Tick for that.
Thank you.
And
I'll take that.
That box there, if you're sitting there, then you're what we would call in the social styles language an expressive.
Okay. Yeah.
If you go one box up from there, and an expressive is absolutely relationship based. They are also generally someone who likes to be heard, like they want to be heard. They like to be in the spotlight. They like to, but they also like to involve others. And we'll talk about how that's different to amiable in a moment. But if you go straight up from there, that's what we call a driver. Now, this is someone who is absolutely focused on getting stuff done. Now, they're the one that might come across as aggressive, but I want to use that word carefully because aggressive is subjective. It's how you experience someone, right? And that's a key piece that I really encourage people to take away is the way that you describe someone else, you're describing it from your preference, from the way that you see the world. So actually, I see that person as aggressive, but actually someone who's another driver is not going to see that person as aggressive. They're going to experience them as very assertive and decisive. So it's really important to understand that you're viewing things from your preference, from your style. But they are often that quite very decisive, very competitive, absolutely happy to offer their opinion and don't actually really necessarily want to hear anybody else's, because the quicker you can get something done, the quicker you can move on to the next thing. They're very results oriented, very driven, hence the driver.
Okay.
Anyone in your life, either you or the
I could think of maybe a few. And it's interesting. My colleague that talks about, or my friend that talks about her colleague. I'm going to call my friend's colleague Barbara. Let's call her Barbara. You know, she described Barbara as very. You know, she just goes uber into uber. She's gone uber driver mode. Yeah. She's really bossy. She's going, this is gonna, and she's just not listening to anyone else, and she knows that her opinion is the right and her way is the right one. And yeah, Just doesn't
listen. And that is exactly true. So when you said at the beginning of the podcast, actually, it's like, oh, they're becoming the Uber version of themselves. When we look at these, when we use the lens of social styles, that is a way to start to assess, is someone under stress? Now, what's interesting here is that first level of stress, which, by the way, stress is good. Let's not just discount that conversation. Being stressed is actually, there is a good element to that. Because it improves your memory because you're hyper-focused and your brain is storing it because it wants to remember that situation because clearly it's important. That's why you're in your sympathetic nervous system. And it helps you to be quite efficient with tasks because, again, you're very, very focused on it. So I don't want to discount that when we're talking about under stress, because you might have people on your team, or you might indeed feel stressed and think that's a bad thing. But it's about understanding, what level of stress am I under? Because that first level of stress might be okay. It's when that becomes the norm, when we're operating from that level of stress and we're constantly in our sympathetic nervous system, which most people understand as fight or flight, that is when it becomes incredibly damaging, as I'm sure you've spoken before about around the neurobiology of it, right? But drivers, absolutely. So if we come back to that framework, if we then go across to that top quadrant on the left, that is what we describe as analyticals in the social styles language. Now, this is someone who, remember, we're on the other side of the line now, so they need a lot of facts. They want a lot of detail. They want a lot of information. Do not withhold that email trail from them. They want every single forwarded email that you have ever received on the email trail. And they want to dive into the detail. And where they differ from drivers is that may make them quite slow in their responsiveness. So that may be the person right now who's on the Zoom that doesn't put their video on, and you're not even sure if they're listening because they haven't contributed. Right? Or even if their video is on, it's like, are they really, they haven't contributed anything on like the last 3 scrums that we've
really
action.
Bored.
Like they've just checked out. Maybe they're analytical. And maybe they're not even under stress yet. They're just analytical and they're processing everything. Then again, we'll talk about what happens to all of them under stress. But if we drop down then into the quadrant below, is there someone actually in your mind that you know that might be analytical, Rachel, that's coming up like,
Yeah, lots of people. Actually, I'm thinking my other half, but I think he's bang in the middle, actually, between analytical and driver. But there's lots of people I can think of that do just stay quiet. And you think, why aren't they contributing? Are they bored? Are they not got any ideas? But actually, they're just processing stuff. Yeah.
And then when they do contribute, it's a question. And they have more questions. And then they have more questions. And then they have more questions. And then the driver is like, oh my goodness, like starting to internally combust, like no more questions. Let's just get it done. Now, it's interesting you say you think your other half is there, because that old cliche, right? It's a cliche because it's a universal truth that opposites attract.
Okay.
Across the diagonal. It's often because of that. And, when I'm doing work, obviously in the corporate world, that's about recognizing, who's on your diagonal, because that's often where the greatest frustration lies. But also then what does that mean? We've been attracted to that person in our own life personally. And inevitably, the work I do is holistic. It ends up being much, blurred lines. It's how can you be the best version of yourself at work? That means personally as well. Is how do you then say, this is a person I chose, and what are the types of conversations I'm having with them based on their style, right? And this is also another really big key understanding, because I don't know about you, but I grew up with the kind of, we're not particularly religious, but that do unto others as you would, how would you finish that sentence? Do unto others as you would.
Do to yourself.
Exactly. And that's kind of the golden rule, and the Gita platinum rule that I really encourage people to take away, which will help them to really shift their perspective and their empathy and their ability to communicate and connect, is do unto others as they would have done unto themselves.
Okay, well, I like that. Yeah.
Right. And that's about saying, wow, he or she is highly analytical, and that is completely different to me. but I just want them to get it done and do it this way and make it happen. Hold on a second. First, I need to recognize where I am. Then I'm going to recognize where they are. And then I'm going to say, okay, how do I communicate to them in the way that they get it?
Yes.
And how do I do that? And this is where it gets sophisticated, obviously, the work that I do, and very nuanced, is how do I do it without letting go of my authentic self? Right? How do I find that balance between adapting and not surrendering? But that can be for another conversation.
Yeah. But sometimes just understanding that is half the battle, isn't it? So I know that when I'm communicating with my other half and I have all these ideas, I thought of this and I've got to do this, and what do you think? And I have learned that the first thing he will come back to me with is a problem or a question or not a criticism, but he's looked at it and he's gone, oh, how would that work? And then, and then what will happen is I'll go, oh, he doesn't like it. And then 2 weeks later, I'll be saying all that. And he'll go, well, you said you were going to do this. It was a brilliant idea. And I'll go, yeah, but you said it was awful. And he'll go, no, I didn't. I was just thinking about it and processing it. I'll be like, oh. And so now just to expect that and go, oh, that's great. That's him processing. And actually that is really helpful because I need someone to analyze my ideas. Because I have a lot of ideas and not all of them between you and me are great, but some of them are.
Every single one of them is fabulous.
You know, well, I think so, but not everyone else does. And that's why actually the opposite is, like you said, actually working with the opposite. If you can get over your social style, is so powerful.
Yes.
And because often it's actually the style that's going on. So going back to my friend with Barbara, the driver, it's often her style that's the problem, not what she's saying.
Yeah. And it's just, and she's not doing it to be bossy. No. She's not doing it to be aggressive or be rude or be dismissive. She's doing it. And it's an exercise I often do, actually. And I encourage your listeners to do this as you're listening, is to just fold your arms, right? Like just fold your arms and now fold them the other way. Yeah, a bit weird, right? First way. If you're watching us on video, this is
actually, no, it's that way. I did actually. Oh, that's really.
So go back to doing it the first way. That's what your preference is. Why do you fold your arms that way? Did you see someone do it? Is it someone you admired? Were you taught that as a child? We can explore all of that. Yeah. But the key liberating fact is that you prefer to fold your arms that way. Now, can you fold your arms the other way? Of course you can. Does it hurt? Is it difficult? Does it take more energy?
Isn't it? It's uncomfortable, and it takes more thought, which takes more energy, and it's difficult, but it is needed. So Gita, I'm really interested in all these interactions, but first, can you just tell us about the bottom left quadrant?
The final box is amiable.
Okay.
Now, this is someone that is very focused on relationships, similar to expressive. Remember, they're both below the line. But this person is very consensus driven. They're very conservative. They're not a high risk taker like a driver or potentially an expressive. They're very conservative and they want everyone's opinion to be heard. They're likely, again, remember, they're left of the line, so they're taking their time. They're considering things. They're possibly asking questions when they're interacting. But generally the questions they're asking is, what do you think about that, Rachel? And have we heard from such and such on this call? So they are very much about the group collective. And what tends to happen to them, and I'll refresh around as we go around the quadrants with styles, is again, they become the Uber version of themselves, as your friend has recognized, and they acquiesce. Yeah. So they want to avoid conflict at the best of times. And they are more likely right now when they're feeling really stressed to say yes, even more. So when you're thinking about that as a leader or when you're looking at your team or anyone for that matter, and you see someone that just keeps putting their hand up and go, okay, cool. No, that's where, yep, I will do that. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Because they're kind of taking one for the team all the time. And you can imagine what then happens to them. Yeah. Right. It's like more, because they're trying to please everybody and be helpful. So anyone in your mind that you can think of who's
absolutely. And they do get, but you can sometimes see they're saying yeah, and they're being but you can sort of see underneath there's some stuff bubbling away, I think. Yeah. And I think do amiables come resentful quite quickly?
They can. That's more an expressive. They tend to. Expressives go to blame and attack. They go to attack very quickly. Amiables become resentful when it really is long term. So when they've been existing in a state of stress for a long time, but they tend to still take the burden on themselves. Like, I knew that this would happen. I should have been more responsive. I knew that I was going to let them down. They still go into self-flagellation. And then the deeper that goes, because you've got to think you've got to understand there's different levels of stress, then ultimately it might turn to resentment. And that's when you see them flip. Okay. Right.
So under stress, I've got amiables tend to say yes a lot more, acquiesce, avoid conflict, and self-flagellate. Drivers, I guess, tend to get even more autocratic, don't listen, become uber versions of themselves. You said expressives start to blame and attack people. Anything else that an expressive will do under, oh gosh, I can see that so much in myself. Like,
oh my gosh.
Self-confession to 600 people here, but you know.
Oh, listen, I'm right there with you. If it helps, I am an expressive. You know, if you understand this work, you probably will have spotted that already. But I had a situation a couple of years ago, and I was driving to the airport with my mum next to me, picking up my aunt, who'd had a 26-hour flight coming into London from Sydney. And we left at 5 a.m, because they're inevitably early morning flights. I'm driving along the motorway, and I realised, Rachel, that I'm not going the right way to get to Heathrow. And of course, I go immediately into stress, trigger my sympathetic nervous system, the adrenaline, the cortisol's like pumping. Now, the difference for me, because I'm expressive to how somebody else might have reacted, is this is the first thing that came into my mind. Damn you, Tim. Now, Tim is my other half, and clearly it was his fault that I was driving on the wrong route to Heathrow. Now, I didn't leave it there, Rachel. I picked up the phone. And it's 5:30 in the morning, and I rang him to say, I'm lost. And he's like, oh, my goodness, where are you? I'm like, I don't know where I am. I'm lost. Quite clearly, if you had gotten up this morning and told me the way that you normally go to Heathrow, I wouldn't be in this position. And he's like, okay, I don't know what you want me to do right now. Can you give me like a road sign? Where are you? Can you pull over? Can you switch to map? He's going into like facts, right? Yes, he's trying to get facts to help because he's
analysing his way out of the situation.
Okay. Yeah, because he's feeling stressed because I put him in that state, and I'm getting more and more annoyed because I'm in blame mode and attack mode. So I hear you. Like once you start to recognise it, also this is the liberating thing. It's like, oh, okay, I'm there, and he's there, or she's there, or on my team are there. So their attack, driver is autocratic. You know, I love a little alliteration. Amiables acquiesce. And then what you'll find with analyticals is that they'll avoid. And that means they'll withdraw. So if you've got someone in your life, personally or professionally, that is just not responding right now, it's likely that they're an analytical. They feel completely out of their depth because they don't have the detail and the facts to figure it out. And things are moving quickly. And that's folding their arms way the other way. They don't move quickly. They need time to process. And we're not asking them to do that right now. So then that just triggers the drivers even more. And then they become more bombastic. And it becomes this circular situation where teams are then, and people, just individuals, are becoming more and more and more stressed and more and more unlikely to be able to communicate in an effective way.
That just makes so much sense. I can just recognize that in all sorts of people. And I like what you said about, your golden rule, do unto others as they would have done to themselves. So that's what I'd like to talk about now is how do you modify your behavior to help that person maybe get out of their uber features of each one. So how do you help the analytic stop withdrawing and engage more? How do you help the driver be a little less autocratic, or how do you behave so that, well, I guess actually I'm hearing myself saying, how do you help that person be less autocratic? But actually, as you and I know, we are only responsible for what we can do, our own actions. So actually, I'm going to rephrase my question is, how do I behave so that I can cope with that person and get the best out of that person and help lower their stress levels and my stress levels? For the driver who's being autocratic, the expressive who's blaming and attacking, and the amiable who's just acquiescing to everything.
And the analytical who's avoiding. Yeah. So step one is firstly recognizing who you are. So you cannot adapt to someone else and give them what they need without firstly understanding. So do the work to say, hold on, do I understand who I am and how I prefer to communicate and fold my arms first? And if you don't, then come and see me and we can do some work or watch my free content. It's a case of understanding yourself first. And then once you've got that, as you're already doing, you will recognize someone else's default preference and how they prefer. So that is absolutely fundamental. You cannot reach a destination. It's like, I want to help that person. They're like this. That's your destination, right? Where am I first? You have to put in your current location before you can figure out the route. So I'm here. I want them to get to there or us to get to there. And then it's a case of understanding, and you'll know this by starting to listen really differently and observe really differently how that person actually prefers to communicate. So, for example, with an analytical, you've done the work, you realize you're an expressive and they're an analytical, and you're like, hey, what about this idea? We could do this. We could absolutely pivot this way. We could make sure our clients are getting this. How about that? And you're throwing ideas at them and they're not responding. And you do the work, much as you said, you recognize, oh, hold on, I think I'm putting them into a state of stress. I'm excited. I'm not actually in a state of stress. I'm excited. I think I've triggered their stress response because I'm getting nothing back. Where do I think they lie? Okay, I think you don't know, you can't know. But as I said, I'm happy to send a downloadable where you can know for yourself, and you can always get other people to do it. A bit dangerous there, be careful with that. But in the way that I understand it to be now, where might they sit? What's my guesstimate? If they're an analytical, what do I know to be true? They need time to process. They need information. They have to analyze information before coming back with an opinion, because credibility and reputation is key to them. So in that situation, even the recognition of that, just as I saw you go through the process just then with your husband, like, oh, I see. It makes sense when I do this, that he does that. Even that is going to liberate you from the stress. And then what you can do is think, okay, what can I do, as you say, to help in this situation? So one thing, firstly, what can I do? I can pause on the ideas. I can think about how many statements I'm making versus questions I'm asking. That's a very simple tool that I give to a lot of people. When was the last time I asked this other person a question? I've just been go, 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 go. Okay, let me just assess. And then one of those questions, if it's analytical, is going to speak to the analytical brain. What information do you need from me right now in order to make this decision? Okay. Versus a driver in that same situation, they're loving the ideas, but they're also sick of the ideas because they just want a decision made.
On with stuff.
So I might say to them, and they like statements, remember, not questions, is here's 5 ideas. I need your input by 3 o'clock today in order to determine which way we're going to go forward. Because I know they're results driven. I know time is crucial and they're very, very effective at prioritizing. So I'm going to set them a deadline to get what I need. Okay, versus an amiable who I might have a different conversation with. Again, I'm coming up with the ideas. This is what we could do differently, da-di-da-di-dum. I might say to them, because I know that they're consensus driven and again, they need time to process. I love your opinion on that. And what you're really great at is speaking to the rest of the team about what would be really valuable for them right now. Could you do that for me and come back by Friday for our next scrum? And they might not be able to answer you straight away, by the way, and they might just say yes. And this is where it gets sophisticated. Right? Then you've got to say, oh, well, they've said yes a lot lately and I haven't actually checked in. And then you go to all of your other leadership tools around how do I check in on where they are, how do I look at where they're focusing their time, etc. But this is a fundamental piece of how do I connect and communicate effectively with the people around me. and manage my own state is a game changer.
Yeah. So I can see that is an issue with people who are amiable, when you would like them to do something else, but you know that they're quite overwhelmed already and they're probably not going to say so. I guess, like you said, it's a checking in and what are your priorities right now, and do you have time to do this or not? And something I use quite a lot is, look, I've had this idea, why don't you have a think and get back to me, because that just gives them some thinking space and time, and then they can come back.
And it's also recognizing, listen, things have to move quickly at the best of times. So it's not about, this is why I'm saying the adapting versus surrendering. You need to balance out, because stuff has to get decided. Things have to get done. We need to move forward in this busy world that we're in, regard COVID or otherwise. So it's not about saying, okay, you take all the time you want and then let me know. But it's about understanding that, yes, there's still a deadline, but what do I need to have done with this particular person in order to hit that deadline? And what might they need from me through that process? Because the driver's going to do it. You don't need to interact with them anymore. They know 3 o'clock, they're done, they'll get back to you. And amiable is going to potentially need a cutoff that's earlier than that, because they're going to be checking in with everybody. They're going to be indecisive. They're not going to want to let anybody down. And analytical is going to go over that time, because they're going to still be analysing stuff and trying to figure out the perfect way to present that in a really lovely pivot for the next team meeting on a presentation slide. Potentially, you know, I exaggerate to make a point. But it's not to say that that's okay, you do whatever you need to do to not be stressed. It's about managing the nuances of the human beings and the brains that are around us by recognizing who they are first and who we are, and then what's within my control to do differently. Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about how this would apply to clinical teams who are on the front line, who are running busy departments, redesigning services. And I can see how you might get, you know, the autocratic driver just going, right, this is what we're going to do, with the analyticals thinking, I know, but this usually takes a while and we need to look at the evidence and all that sort of stuff. And then the amiables going around making sure everyone's okay, even when people aren't okay, because people are naturally quite upset and things are happening. And then with the expressives who are feeling their emotions, emoting all over the place perhaps, and you know, there's a lot of blame going on at the moment, and also
still coming up with ideas, and expressive might still be adding ideas into the mix. So it doesn't have to be like negative behavior necessarily that's coming out, but they're maybe coming up with lots of ideas, and the amiable's trying to be very helpful. And then if they are in stress, then they're attacking. It's like, well, we clearly can't do that because such and such department is never going to get it to us because they never get it. And then they go in. So yes, that's going to happen. And then the other thing with amiables is that they're going to be saying yes to the driver. And as we said, they're not necessarily going to be able to, and they're going to be feeling very, normally on that diagonal, it's really, they start to feel very, like that person is very rude and very dismissive and very aggressive.
Maybe even being bullied.
Yes, exactly. So they have high empathy. Both expressives and amiables do, because they're below the line. That's not to say everyone doesn't have high empathy. By the way, you're bits of all of this. I put that caveat around it. And you can be all of these styles. It's just some of them hurt more when you're folding your arms that way. It takes more brain energy, until it doesn't, by the way, until you've folded your arms that many times. And this is the beauty. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. The longer term piece of it is, if I keep folding my arms that way, going to be able to speak to an analytical brain like that. And it's not always going to be this hard. It's not always going to be like rolling your eyes and frustrated and draining my energy. And it's not. That's not how, as you know, our brains are designed. The consistency of creating those new neural pathways is going to mean, hey, I just fold my arms that way now and it's easy. But right now, you know, for those clinical teams, it's crucial that they understand, as we said, the fundamentals of who they are as individuals first, and then how are they potentially coming across. God, I think that might be experienced by, you know, Susie as quite aggressive. I'm being decisive, but knowing what I know now to be true about the different ways that people experience this world normally and under stress, let me just think about what. And then there's little things, tone of voice, body language. Am I sitting next to her? Am I barking down the phone? Am I, okay? And then there's lots and lots of tools that we can look at in terms of adapting.
Yeah. And I think the point you make that, this is just the model and no model is the truth, but some of them are helpful. So don't feel boxed in by this. Don't feel that you have to act in a certain way, we're bits of all, but this, for me, this is a really helpful insight. One thing that we haven't covered, I just want to ask you, is we talked about how as expressives, or how we might go to the other things. How should people deal with expressives who are under stress?
How do they deal with us?
I'm just making notes for my other half here. This is how it involves flowers and champagne.
Yes, well, expressives, and you know this for yourself because you are. Expressives love to be heard. They love to have be an idea generator. They love spontaneity. They don't like to be boxed in. Interesting language that you used there, as it was. So if you're an analytical, it's about understanding that so let's take a situation where you're trying to make a decision on something. I know that she's going to want to come up with lots of other ideas, and I'm an analytical and I need loads of facts, and I've done all of the analysis. So what I'm not going to do is do loads of analysis until I've said to her, for example, hey, listen, I'm thinking about this thing. I'd love to hear your ideas on it. I've got till 4 today. Can we jump on a Zoom, or can we have a coffee if you're living with each other and chat through it at 2? Because I'd love to hear all of your ideas. So then the expressive is yes. Now, as it gets a bit stressful, the expressive is going to go, well, I knew you weren't going to choose that idea because okay, so this is when they go into attack and blame. So managing an expressive that's under stress. Well, before I say anything, what would your insight be?
Well, my insight is just let them have the ideas without feeling you have to respond to all of them, actually. Because, I've been in situations where I've just been having conversations with people and I realised that they've come away completely exhausted. So I've gone, we could do this, and have you thought of this? And, they're like, enough with the ideas. But I think just realise that expressive, they're not saying we have to do everything. They're just sort of thinking things aloud and having ideas. And so I think just be heard. Don't squash the ideas. Don't go, that won't work because that won't work. Just listen to them. And then at the end you could go, well, which one of those might work?
So if they're analytical, do what's good for you. I'm going to take those away and analyze them. I'm going to look at, what the budget will be for each of them. And then I'd love to get your input. And what do you think, Rachel, if you've gone into stress and you're in attack, what do you think is the best way for people, particularly if we think about analyticals because they're on the diagonal, to communicate effectively with you during that time?
I think the absolute worst thing is don't try and defend or say, it's your fault. Don't hit them back with attacks. Just empathise. I'm really sorry. That's really crap. You've gone the wrong way around the M25. You must be really frustrated and tired. Let's see what I can do to help. That's the way to do it.
Exactly. And you start from where they are. Exactly. It's let them rant. And know this about expressives is they will rant big time and then it's gone. They're not holding a grudge like that. Then it's gone and they're back to, not that we're schizophrenic or anything like that, but it can be volatile, right? So that's exactly it. You start there. It doesn't mean you're not going to come up with the facts of how they can get onto the right motorway. That it's not that. That's just going to come secondary because that's your preference to go first with here are the facts, here's the solution, this is what you can do to fix it. But actually I'm going to start in your quadrant. I'm just going to start there. And I'm going to start with, wow, that is huge. And then I'm going to move into, where I prefer to be and where I believe we need to go, because you can't stay in that state, right? We need to get you on the right M25. And you're doing it with the level of being liberated from the personal attack. I cannot believe it. Here she goes again. All I was trying to do was come up with an idea and she's like, bah, 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 bah. So you're liberated from she's being rude to me, or, she always overtalks me. So you start to see these phrases of always and never, and typically you can let them go because you're just recognizing actually that that's a human being over you there that folds their arms a different way to me.
Yeah. I think this thing of difference is so powerful. I remember when I had my kids were really young, when I was a young mum, tiny babies, and I would really beat myself up that we did a sort of Myers-Briggs thing with some baby group I went to, and we had to describe our ideal day. And one mother described her ideal with the day as getting, just staying in her pajamas all day with her children, just sort of being at home with them on her own, wouldn't see anyone, and I remember thinking, like, she just described my utterly worst day. But I had been feeling like a bad mother because I felt that I didn't enjoy my children's company or something like that. Of course I did. But this realised, it came to me quite late in life. Let's just realise that. But the fact that we are just different. One isn't better than another. It is just different. And as soon as you can understand those differences, you can then make allowances, and it just becomes so much easier and so much more joyful, doesn't it?
The self-acceptance, right? It doesn't mean that you have to, you're like, I am, and this is like the authenticity versus arrogance. It's like, well, deal with it because I'm an expressive and that's how I am. It's not that. It's a self-acceptance of, oh, I'm not like a results person. And actually the environment I'm in, when I think about a lot of the companies I work with, I had 15 years in banking. So a lot of my clients are in financial services. And they reward which quadrant in that world gets rewarded?
Driver stroke analytical, I would think.
Yeah. Highly driver driven.
Yeah.
A lot of analyticals drawn to it, but that's not just specific to the financial services industry. Results driven. And so you're sitting there beating yourself up going, I'm never going to be because I'm not like that. You can, again, liberate yourself from that, just understanding this is how I am. Okay, I want to get to there, and this is the behavior that's recognized and rewarded. What am I willing to do to adapt to get to there, and how am I going to get smart at influencing the people that are making those decisions, given that I don't think like them? But now I've got a bit of a roadmap to begin to influence that conversation differently to ultimately get there. And when I think about, the majority of people that listen to your podcast, and as you say, clinicians and in that world, then, where do you think the majority of them live in terms of profile?
I actually think that, a lot of people try and box doctors, box people in healthcare. I think you've got people in every single quadrant for that. I don't think you can put any, say because you're a doctor you're there, or because you're a surgeon you're there, or because you're not. It's actually very well spread out. But one thing I don't think we do very well in healthcare is this job of self-analysis. We weren't taught that at medical school. We haven't really done it. We just got on with it. We had just got on with the job, and now we're going, suddenly, I thought when I went onto the wards as a junior doctor, I would get on with people because I'm friendly, but very soon when suddenly people weren't doing what I asked them to do, or what their jobs, they should have done their jobs, suddenly, boom, we clash, and I have no tools because I just thought if I was nice to people, that would be enough. It wasn't, and suddenly I think I'm an awful human being and an awful doctor because I've never been taught this stuff.
And it's fundamental. That's the thing, whatever industry you're in, because then you take it to the next level of, when I'm looking at teams that I'm working with now around high-performing teams, is what's missing from our team. So if I think about, the medical profession and let's look at our team, if we're all highly analytical and drivers, for example, this is the conversation that starts to happen around where's the empathy for the patient. And then you get, situations where it's like, okay, well, what do we need to do? Let's call them, we'll introduce ourselves by the first name. That's not your preference. That's not your default. You wouldn't even think about that. It's like, potentially, right? I'm here. I'm going to diagnose. I'm going to help this person. It's coming from a good place, but, what does this person need? So when you start to see from a team perspective what's missing, because we're all drivers or analyticals, or no one is highly expressive or no one's highly amiable, then you can start to look at, okay, especially now, right, when everyone's under stress, how do we create this high performance team? Again, and you can't necessarily recruit in an expressive. You can use this tool and, HBDI, as I said, the deeper work that I do through recruitment and that process. But it's even in the recognition that, wow, we don't really have an amiable. And what does that mean? Well, that team cohesion and the making, okay, well, how do we fabricate that? How do we do that on purpose now that we know what's missing? And you can do it from a much more strategic perspective and then start to see what happens, right? It's amazing.
Yeah. So Gita, that's just been absolutely fascinating and really, really helpful. And we'll put all those resources up in the show notes so people can sort of find that out. And if I can manage on the video, I'll see if I can get a little slide in the corner actually, so while we're talking, people can see it. So if people are listening to the podcast, get yourself onto the YouTube video and you'll be able to see it. Hopefully, if I can work the tech, talk about a fast, steep learning curve about tech, etc. I'm really good at video editing now. Well, getting better at video editing. So let's have your 3 top tips. What would your 3 take-home messages for people be right now, in amongst the COVID crisis, in amongst the stress, in terms of the way they just make allowances for other people?
3 top tips. Good question. I mean, my expressive brain has 25, obviously.
Let's start with 3 and we'll see.
That. Yeah. The 3 top, I mean, the first instinct that I would say is, given everything that's going on, is be kind to yourself. Yeah. Recognize that you're going to react to this differently than the person next to you, and that's okay. So that would be a top tip, is just take a breath and be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Secondly, it would be to create some reflection time to really enjoy starting to understand a little bit more about what happens to you, and do it within a framework, whatever you choose to do. Mm-hmm. Because one of my favorite things to say is, you can't read the label from inside the jar. It's really, right? It's really hard to go, oh, how am I coming across? And who am I, just from inside? So then the third thing is, get some feedback from other people.
Yeah.
Is ask how, and this is a bigger meta piece, so not so much navigating the situation now, but in order to evolve your understanding of who you are and how you can be with other people, if indeed you want to be more effective and have a higher influence, is how am I actually coming across? And ask that question. And actually, I just did that on LinkedIn today. I can't wait to see what people come up with. But that's one of the top tips I give to leaders, to everyone, is simply go and ask someone, how would you describe me to someone else in 3 words?
Yeah.
And just see what they say, from a place of being kind to yourself, from a place of not, oh my God, is that what they think of me? Breathe it in and just see what happens from there, because it is a case of getting better and better every day. But doing it from a place of kindness to yourself and a true will to evolve and be better for yourself and then those around you is going to keep you moving through the discomfort of folding your arms the opposite way.
Yeah, I love that, particularly that third one about getting some feedback. In our Shapes courses, in one of the units about how we trigger our stress response, we get people beforehand to go and get 3 words. 3 words to describe them at their best, 3 words to describe them at their worst. And actually, they are really revelatory, really, to people about how they are experienced. So that's a really quick win, something you could do. And if you are listening to this podcast and using this for CPT, go and do that. Go and ask us 3 words at your best, so how you experience at your best, and then ask for 3 words under pressure, and it will be really interesting. Then just reflect on that, and maybe reflect on which quadrant you're in there.
The other thing, can I add one last thing to the 3 words thing?
You may.
Is just what 3 words would I like them to be using to describe me? Because then you're going to get the gap analysis. Then you're going to get, well, have I even thought about how I want to come across? Have I even thought about those words for myself? And then it's like, oh, is that marrying up with how people are experiencing me? And if not, then what can I do about it if I want to?
Yeah, it's so important to get some reality rather than just how I think people experience me. It often is very different to how people actually are. Yeah. So Gita, if people wanted to contact you, find out more about your work, how can they contact you?
Well, my website is highdefinitionyou.com. But if you want to find me on Instagram or LinkedIn, just DM me. I'm sure you'll put the links in because I've got a complicated name. But just send me a message and I'll happily chat through things. I'll put a link in for you, Rachel, where people can download something so they can self-assess as well. Right. If they're interested in just finding out, I mean, who isn't, right? Who am I? Yeah. A bit more curious about who am I? Start from a place of, that would be my overall top tip. See, expressive, still coming up with ideas at the end. My overall I guess advice right now and going forward is to be more curious than afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come from that place of curiosity about yourself, about others, about the world, and you're not going to be able to stay in a state of fear. Your brain is not designed to activate curiosity and stay in a state of fear. So whether you're applying that to what your social style is or how you deal with the epic amount of change, that as an overarching, I feel is helpful.
Great. Thank you so much. Will you come back on the podcast another time? I'm sure there's lots more we need.
Oh my gosh, you're never going to shut me up. We'll be talking for hours.
Right. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
Gita. We'll speak soon. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.